Velkomin kæru gestir, gaman að sjá ykkur hér í dag og fyrir ykkur sem eru að koma í fyrsta sinn, velkomin á nýju skrifstofun okkar. Þetta fer fram á ensku og ég ætla núna að breyta yfir. So we are going to continue in English. Welcome everybody to this Fulbright Forum, where two of our grantees are going to be presenting today. Very excited about that. We will be on Zoom as well. And if you are on Zoom, then you are welcome to put questions into the chat there, and be assured we will see them. For those who are here in person, we do have some refreshments, so please feel free to help yourselves. As I mentioned, we have two presentations here today. Very different presentations, right? But that is the beauty of Fulbright, that we have very many different types of projects, right? So we're going to start with Dr. Larry Leibrock, who is here as a Fulbright-NSF Distinguished Scholar in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. I'm glad to see both of you are wearing Icelandic sweaters today. That's very nice to see. But Larry has been hosted by the University of Iceland, the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. So and he's here from Idaho State University. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. I'm really tired of PowerPoints. I've been able to go up, and so I wanted to just kind of talk about this. I wrote a report. This is one of the highlight teaching experiences I've had in my life. I really focus on case methods. I'm really a cyber intelligence guy. I do forensics. Basically, my focus is critical infrastructure. I came here to teach a very technical course. And one of the great things about teaching internationally is you get to meet students where they are. And so I assess these students, and they're great students. But many of them are, number one, not comfortable with case methods. And I do case methods because I'm really here teaching judgments. Because at the end of the day, you will not remember a fact, but you'll remember a narrative. The students really like case methods, but at first they were afraid of it. And because I would do cold calls, I'd pick dice, and everyone had a number, and I would roll the dice, and the students were kind of shocked that I would call on them. And I said, wait a second, this is not me, it's random chance. This is dice. Don't blame me, blame the dice. I gotta say that some students really could stand up and defend the ideas. Some were actually quite good. A few of the ladies really were excellent. I mean, they would get up and they would read the case and they would open the case. I was amazed. Some students were not prepared for that intensity. So I thought I was going to teach a small class, but I ended up teaching actually 3 classes. The cyber war class was really good, and I had to change the security engineering course because the students didn't have math skills. That's okay. I mean, you meet your students where they are. The idea, and I'm okay with that. But that had second order of consequences. I had to write all the cases again, to change the cases, and I had to change the book on the fly. So it was a pretty intense experience. I had some great colleagues. I want to thank my department chair in the back, and this is Dr. Bob back there. And I have a great colleague. I have 2 great colleagues here, Helmut and Thomas. And they're both brand new computer security guys. We're building a brand new program here. That's the good stuff. I did basically 9 different invited talks. Some of them were pretty technical. One of them was called Cyber Threat Intelligence for Iceland. It was well attended. I had some people from CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team, and they got a little scared because this stuff is, Iceland is not prepared for cyber attacks. It's not. And that's okay. Somebody's got to be somewhere. These attacks are getting bigger and stronger. And the challenge is frankly, Iceland is not resourced, the computer emergency response team, the way you would see it in the US. It is not resourced. A couple of talks I had with some invited people from Department of Homeland Security and CCDCOE, And we had a student do an excellent talk on using a single board computer as an attack and defense simulator. He built Raspberry Pi as a project and did some great work. He also had a student do a firewall, which was really an intrusion and detection. One of the challenges I found with the University of Iceland really has no network security. People kind of blow through back and forth. It's against resource issue. You know, that somebody who's in charge of the checkbooks decides they're going to spend money and cybersecurity is not there. The biggest critique I want to make is we need to avoid something called security theater. And I've seen this in a lot of places, and I've taught at a lot of institutions. Oh yeah, we're going to have cybersecurity because we're going to make everyone change your password every week. That's great, but passwords are just part of the issue. We have to have resources, and it's not possible to teach cybersecurity unless you have laboratories. You can't do it. My model is, if I'm teaching someone to drive a car, you have to get behind the wheel. You have to drive a car, and there's no lab here. It's just, that's something that has to be fixed. This was one of the best teaching experiences I've had. Really learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about my students, and became pretty adept at understanding Iceland. The challenge we have is we need to make sure that scholars are plugged in here, they understand what resources are available. If you're going to teach esoteric subjects, I had to fly in some equipment here because the university didn't have equipment. And I was only going to be involved in it like once. Would I recommend this program? Absolutely. It was the best time I've had, and I did enjoy all my work here. Any questions for me? We're done. We're done.
No, you're done, yes. Let's open up to questions then. Peter will check and see if there's anything coming in on Zoom. Yes.
While he's doing that, I'll fire off a question.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. As a complete outsider and
Sure.
ignorant of the
Right.
field, can you talk a little bit about what the lab provides and what equipment did you need to bring in?
Okay.
Talk a little bit about the hardware.
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. I am a practitioner. I work in an area where there's not a lot of theory, and there's not a lot of journals. And that cyber threat intelligence didn't even exist until about 10 years ago. It didn't even exist. And the challenge is you can only teach someone about, for example, how code can be compromised by doing a PowerPoint. But you can't, he or she needs to get the feel of the code. And the stuff that we do, I don't want to put on the open network because it will corrupt your system. And I teach people how to break into computer systems. So that requires a kind of an exotic, restricted area. And the university doesn't have that. It just doesn't have those resources. We have an excellent software engineering program that focuses on writing good code, but my philosophy is bad code. The second issue is I was shocked that there are computer science students in Iceland who are enrolled in computer science programs. They're not required to have a computer. I'm going, wait, how do you do surgery without a scalpel? Can you explain that? And I was told that that's a university policy. So I also build these small computers using these single board computers. And I show students what the traffic looks like between the system, TCP/IP packets. That's great until but you're focusing on a piece of equipment. I brought an electric crane in, an electric toy crane, and showed them how the crane talked electronically to a controller and how you could intercept and take control of the crane. We did a tabletop exercise. The students have never seen a tabletop exercise. I put them in a case of, you're the manager, you're the attacker, you're the defender, you're the executive. And we did a tabletop exercise, and using this little computer, kind of showed them the kind of simulation and gave them 5 different scenarios. In effect, you cannot make something concrete until they have a physical artifact in their hands. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Sure.
What did you find students on an individual basis were most ignorant of as far as their own personal cybersecurity?
The real, it's interesting, it's fascinating to me because I had some excellent students who said, you know, Larry, I understand writing a program, but I can't understand this area of cyber threat intelligence. I said, well, look at this. When you write a program, you have really perfect knowledge. You understand the inputs, you understand your outputs, you understand the algorithms. That's great for a computer, for software engineering. Like cybersecurity, you don't know who the variables are, and you don't know what the outputs are, and you have no idea how the algorithms work. So I'm teaching students to move from a certain environment to an area that's characterized by high levels of uncertainty, and that scares a lot of them. But I also found that, you know, when you challenge them, they really understood. And one of the things I was proud of is we had a lot of gender equality in my classes, which I did not see in America. You know, you rarely, and I'm really proud that Iceland has made, I think, concrete improvements in what America should emulate.
Mhm.
I guess I'm just curious because, like, I guess since coming here, I've gotten the impression that like a lot of things are very like centralized on technology, like both like the Kanatala and the phone electronic IDs, like especially like from like banking to fast passes, all that being on a phone. Does that sort of lack of cybersecurity sort of extend to the systems and sort
Sure.
of?
Yeah, it does, because ultimately the Conatel is already compromised. You've already established that you have a token that identifies your identity, but you can't go to hell in Iceland without a Conatel, right? Which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. The challenge is Iceland has done great jobs in building really a lot of connectivity, but have they really thought about security by design?
So the support is for making sure everything works, not for what happens if things go wrong.
Correct. And my business is things are going to go wrong. And I'm in the zero trust business. Iceland is a very trusting country. It has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. But trust is not part of cybersecurity. It's just not there. Okay.
Martins?
Yeah, I was wondering, I took a look at the course of relations this morning, like all the students left the class, like they also did high workload, so they've been like challenged way more than other classes.
Right.
But they also said like, I learned so much more than in the other classes, and like, saying like the way that you taught the material was like really showing them like how important it is. So I think what's really useful for us also to see like how you're engaging students and like how you're making them, despite the high workload, being interested in the material and being then engaged with the material, because that's typically where we're scaring students away. Like when you make it like, okay, cold call, like you up, like last time I tried that, like the students just like didn't show up again next week. So like,
Yeah.
I'm interested in your secret there.
Yeah.
I enjoy the case method because what people get to frame the problem, and they bring in unique perspectives. There are wrong solutions. There are also solutions that are right, and essentially you want students to basically frame the problem and be able to communicate, because the challenge we have is knowledge is so explosive and changing. We need to do better in terms of communication skills. We're all learning here.
Mhm. No, and I think, and thank you for making that point, Matthias, because I think that again shows the great value of the Fulbright program in terms of bringing in a different way of doing things, a different, modus operandi, and giving that to the students, right, and showing them that. That the way that maybe classes are set up here, that might be different if they go abroad for later study and all of that, and give the American way of doing things in the case studies, I think is fabulous that you've introduced that to students in the computer science program who maybe many had not had that experience.
I've turned all my cases over to Thomas the back, so and I don't like some of the cases. Are US cases, but I try to make them Icelandic. And I try to change the names and all of it. I think those give a better narrative to the environment. I wanted to have an environmental critical infrastructure case, but I ran out of time.
Yeah,
I'm so curious on the electric crane. Did the original operators manage to get back control of it?
No.
Never?
Now, because ultimately what you're doing is you're hijacking the communications between the controller. It's like a drone. A drone is dependent upon the commands it's getting from a command and control system. So ultimately, if I can hijack that particular channel, I can either destroy the channel, which is fairly trivial to do, but I want to take command of the crane. I want the crane operator to be at the top of the crane, so I'm moving around, so he never wants to go back. You know, so the ultimate idea is how you destroy people's trust in their system. If a crane operator thinks he's not going to be able to control a crane, cranes go out of business. In Iceland, we have about 300 cranes, 300 maritime cranes. In Iceland, about 35% of your economy is maritime based. So if you destroy your crane infrastructure, Iceland has about 30 to 60 days worth of food reserves, and then you're done.
Hmm.
So it is a critical infrastructure.
Gives me chills.
yeah.
Right, so another thing I sort of think about cloud cybersecurity is, are there also recommendations for ways or like, are there examples of places where the best cybersecurity might just be removing the cyber? Or like, let's say something is automated, but not necessarily doesn't need to have programming in it.
It's highly problematic when you consider, for example, the 737, the new aircraft, has about 25 million lines of code. You can't fly the airplane without code. People complain about Windows. How many lines of code do you think are in Windows today? About 100 million lines of code of all the device drivers. That's the so tell me, how do we unplug computers?
Wait, glass windows are linked.
No,
Oh, just
Windows 10 Service Pack 7, okay? The one you play on your desktop.
Yeah.
The code base is used, so we have this complexity. Tell me how we turn the clock back. We can't unplug airplanes, we can't unplug ourselves from computers. I mean, when's the last time you've not checked your email on a daily basis, right?
Should check it more often.
I know. But you know, I mean, they're embedded in our life and they're embedded in our economy. So, you know,
Like, it's like a crane where it's like a mechanical thing.
well, yeah, but it cheats us off the cracker in terms of, in Iceland, you're not going to be able to have a maritime economy unless you have automation at the docks. You just can't. And so if you destroy the critical infrastructure, that has second order effects. Notice what's happening in the Ukraine today. The first attack sites the Russians attacked in Ukraine were not the political infrastructure, not the military, cranes. They went after the energy and they went after docks. You start having populations starve to death because they can't eat, and they go, I don't think I want to go for this war very much. And so ultimately critical infrastructure is a high priority target in our current.
So should there be like a redundancy then, or like?
That one carry you very clear. How redundant do you want systems? I mean, in our nuclear plants, we have 7 layers of redundancy, and we still have failures. So, yeah.
I guess just
Sure.
two questions. One, before you came, you presumably had, maybe you had like research questions, or you had some sort of question or thesis about your experience here. Maybe you were going to try to learn something, take it back. And so the first question is, what did you learn? What was your question? And is it still your question? Did you get any partial or complete answer to it?
Well, my research question is, could I use case studies with students who have never had been exposed to cases to teach teach security engineering? That was my focus. Now remember, I had a lot of teaching experience before. I had a Fulbright at Oxford. My Oxford Fulbright was working with PhDs, highly theoretical stuff. We're talking about efficient algorithms and things. So I was saying, okay, this is not Oxford. So how do I apply non-theoretical precepts, best practices, and standards using the case method as the primary pedagogy vehicle? And that was my research question, is cases.
Okay.
And from the student reaction, the students actually enjoy cases a lot. In fact, I was asked, like, why don't we do more cases? And I said, well, because you know, I can't teach you cybersecurity, I can only enable your learning. And that shocked several of them. I said, I'm not your teacher here, I'm the first learner among learners. You need to write your own cases. And kind of flip it back on.
Interesting. And thank you for that. And the second question is, did you have an opportunity to work with anybody from the government of Iceland to talk about this?
I have, and I'm going to be politically correct here. I'm going to state my focus is teaching. And Iceland, in a maturity model for cybersecurity, is at least 15 years behind the United States. At least 15. You are dramatically under-resourced, and frankly, I want to be very careful when I say this. We need to avoid embracing security fear. I want to be politically correct.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's also okay to discuss things here. I mean, that's what Fulbright is about, right? So
That was not
Yeah.
my job.
Yeah.
My job was teaching. I was not going to evaluate the pedagogy. I wasn't going to evaluate the programs. I was here to teach one course, and I got the privilege of teaching 3.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. You mentioned you had run out of time and that you could have done so much more. Is there any intention to continue either collaboration with you or the university to continue building on the work you've done? Do you know?
That's a difficult question because there are no adequate resources to do that. And the challenge is we're running a program that supports basically four months of, and she only gets so much resources and I think the university just doesn't have the sufficient resources to embark in really cutting edge programs. They just don't. Or actually, that's incorrect. They've chosen not to apply those resources. It's a different issue. Okay. Thank you for the question.
Any more questions? I know this isn't because you said you weren't going to discuss sort of but can I still ask you if you were to sort of see what if there is one overarching issue that you think is a cybersecurity threat here in Iceland, where would you point?
Be very careful, very politically correct here. I will also have a relationship with the government, so I've got to be careful what I say.
Because you can't say it, because then everyone will know what the vulnerability is.
Well, every system can be vulnerable, and vulnerability is, but the challenge is we need to think beyond cybersecurity, but think about the resilience of our infrastructures, because we're going to have attacks. The problem I see in Iceland is you don't know you've already been attacked. And we have some attacks now. This is very technical stuff, but there are fileless attacks where your system can be compromised and it destroys the instance of the file on the storage device that only exists in memory. So your server is compromised and you don't know it. And that was a shock when I gave that to some government people. They like, wait, I can't, yeah, well, let me show you how it works. The second issue is people think about software. Why attack the software? Why attack the hardware? I can go, you can go out and blow the processor. So you're not going to, if you eradicate the processor's firmware, you're not going to get any performance out of the system at all. So in some respects, you're a prisoner of what you don't know. There's unequivocally, I'll make this statement. Iceland has compromised infrastructure. It's foolish. It's Pollyannish to think it doesn't. In the United States, we've had nuclear sites compromised in some cases for weeks before we know about it. The nuclear site doesn't know. And they're watching it all day long. And Iceland's not watching it. Okay. I want to be very politically correct here.
No, very interesting, yes.
Resources are scarce, and the government decides it wants to spend resources where it's going to get a return. And if they want to fund cybersecurity, if they want to fund a new innovation program in cybersecurity, they'll fund it. If they don't, they won't. Thank you.
All right.
personal level question. Would you, if you take a car, say like a Tesla, where it has over-the-air
I own
updates
one.
and it's all code-based, would you consider that a security risk driving it?
Well, I want to also be very careful about this because I was involved in some studies at the US government on it. Okay, I want to use this term carefully here. Tesla doesn't just get commands and updates from the server. It's promiscuous in terms of communication with other Teslas.
Mhm.
So the Teslas, as you're going down the road, it does peer-to-peer communications. The amount of personal data that is sent to the Tesla would shock you. Your driving characteristics, how many turns you have on the steering wheel. So it's not only a question of security, it's a question of privacy and surveillance. And to what extent were you as an employee, as a buyer of a Tesla or any smart device? I mean, I have a Wi-Fi washer and dryer in my house. You know, and would anyone tell us that this data is being transmitted and marketed? I mean, your data is packaged by Tesla, and Tesla, frankly, sells that material to insurance companies. So they know what your driving characteristics are. They know, for example, that your average driver in America drives about 15 miles a day. So if you're a long distance driver, you pay more for an exposure premium. And Tesla markets that stuff. And to what extent are we letting ourselves becoming a surveillance society is a social question for us to think about. I don't do politics. I try not to do politics, but ultimately, I think these are profound questions that we need to ask. I've talked too long here.
No, this is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Larry.
Again, I want to thank, I could not have been hosted by a better team. All the University of Iceland, including one of my great colleagues in that, Gregory Kirsten. He helped me in electrical engineering. I gave several talks on electrical engineering. But the faculty here, what I love about the university is it's a small faculty. It's very collegial, and you don't see that in a lot of universities. You just don't. But thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again. That was absolutely fascinating. I think we're all maybe having a hard hitter, yes, but we're going to move on now to our second speaker of the day, Gregory Harris, who is with the Kennedy School at Harvard, and he is the Ministry for Foreign Affairs Arctic Scholar this year, hosted by the University of Iceland, the Environment and Natural Resources graduate program. And hopefully we'll have a lighter, maybe, sort of, unless he's going to give us terrible news on the environment, I don't know, maybe, but. But please come up and, yeah, can't wait to hear from you.
Hey, so it's funny, you didn't want to do PowerPoint because you use it all the time. I almost never use PowerPoint in my teaching, but I was like, okay, I'll just do this because I can get some pictures.
Yeah.
So I teach writing at Harvard University, and as a writer coming to Iceland with a broad interest in conservation and maybe especially the hopeful stories of conservation, I sort of showed up with some initial ideas of stories I'd write about, and then a great deal of openness. So in fact, when I first met some of you kind of room, learned about your research in ecoacoustics and learned about your research on geofalcons. I was like, wow, these might be great stories to write about. So I would say I spent the early period of time here just curious, just visiting places, trying to form ideas about stories, and then I came up with some. So I think today what I'll do is I'll present some of the stories that I've started to write about, and then also a little bit of the thinking behind them, like how do you come up with a story and an angle and work with an editor and all that stuff. And I will say it's a lagging process for me because I'm fairly slow, I think, about coming to the idea and writing it. I'm not trained as a daily journalist where I just pump out an article instantly. So for example, I was in Thailand for 2 weeks this last summer, and I've written 2 articles about it that have been published, and the third one's on the way for the spring. So, but that all happened here. I was writing about Thailand. And so it takes a while. So I've got a good number of stories and even more potential stories. But to begin, my teaching. So I was teaching at the two programs, actually, the Environment and Natural Resources program and the Creative Writing. This kind of mirrors the split I have at Harvard as well, where I'm teaching persuasive writing in the School of Government and part of the Arctic Initiative, focusing on environmental stuff, and then also teach creative writing and edit a literary journal. So here's a couple pictures. Let's see. I subtitled that last slide, "What is this crazy sculpture?" Because the first time I walked onto campus, I was like, what is going on here? Somebody seems to be having murderous intent toward a seal with a book.
And he's naked.
And he's naked, yeah. Naked guy on the seal preparing to whack it with a book. And I was like, this is a different model of learning and pedagogy than I think I've encountered before in the world at universities. And it's, if you've been there, you know, it's right front and center. So the very first story, just day one, walking into the university, I was like, I have to figure out what's going on here and write about it. So I'm pitching a story about this. I've got a couple of magazines in mind. One is the American Scholar, which is just an intellectual magazine published by Phi Beta Kappa, and it's interested in great questions like this. Harvard Review is a literary magazine that I've written for before. And so I spent a bunch of time talking to university historians, like where did the statue come from? It's Simander in the seal. I spent a bunch of time in the library reading about Simander, this character who's a legend and a historical figure. So legend-wise, he's constantly tricking the devil. The seal is the devil, and this is a trick that's in the middle of happening. History-wise, he's a precursor for the writing down of the sagas. He's sort of, it happened on his farm, and he's this historical figure, very important for early learning in Iceland. So I started researching the story. I'm actually tomorrow I'm talking to a folklore expert from the program at the university about this. So that's one story. But a few things about the teaching at the university. So here's a picture of my class. We had a final class at my house of the creative writing program, and students from the other class joined. You will recognize somebody from this room, Krista. And I have to say, like Larissa, I'm so impressed by both the faculty and the students at the University of Iceland. I had students who founded a cat cafe in their spare time. Yes. I had students who are on the board of Iceland's biggest environmental organization. I had students who, I think this was most impressive to Candace, my partner, were in the movie Eurovision Song Contest. And this all just on the side as they're raising children, going to the university, and it's in both classes just incredible discussions, and people brought their creativity and involvement, and maybe similar to you, Larry, the initial point of contact with the students, they weren't used to a style quite as interactive, but within a couple of classes, it was just free-flowing discussion, and it was wonderful. University is sort of a magical place. I got the northern lights above it. I loved walking into a building and seeing my name, teaching a class whose title I couldn't understand. I'm like, oh, I'm teaching Smithia today. And there's the sagas and the literary tradition here are so important, right? That you get these texts on the side of the Edda building, which is going to be the new home of the original kind of documents, the preserved legacy of Iceland. So there were two classes I was teaching. One was climate writing, how to change minds and policies. That was the one side of me. The other was workshop Icy Cold and Hot Off the Press, where we looked at recent books published about the far north, from everything from cli-fi and apocalypse settings where the Arctic is the last refuge of humanity, to Andres Magnusson's On Time in the Water, a very deep, wonderful, serious look at climate change and Iceland's history with glaciers and family history, and how do you get people to care about this stuff. So we read a bunch of things and talked about them, and what I taught them is how to write book reviews to get published. And the last book we read was something called Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, an American writer whose vision of the future, this utter dystopian future, which is full of climate refugees, takes place in 2024. She wrote it 30 years ago. And we're like, yeah, we're kind of getting there. So this creates, for writers and thinking about publishing, this is what I'm teaching in some part, you know, if you've got that kind of coincidence, hey, it's about to be 2024, it's time to revisit this classic, you know, like sci-fi dystopian novel. Where are we? You know, then that's a great one to do. One question that I think, Belinda, you asked us about is, you know, ongoing relationships. And I have talked with the Environment and Natural Resources program about coming back next fall and teaching a short workshop. Even before I talked to them, I noticed when I went to my page at the University of Iceland, climate writing was there for 2024. So they haven't told me yet that I'm coming back, but somehow I feel responsible.
You'll be that, you'll be that.
So, greater powers at work than I know about.
That was hacked.
Their response. Okay, so then the first thing I did when I got here that really brought out that really brought out a story that I'm going to focus on and write about. And I know somebody is watching on Zoom is interviewing about this. We went out to Vatnajökull National Park, right around Jökulsárlón, the kind of glacial lagoon, iceberg lagoon next to what's not supposed to be called the Black Diamond Beach. And it was a field course taught by Jóngeir Peterson, who was really my key contact for making all this happen. And so we went on this course and this question of how does Iceland cope with protecting its natural areas while tourism ramps up? What kind of infrastructure do you need? That's extremely it's a big general question for Iceland and a very pointed question for Jökulsárlón, because if you've been there, they have just like terrible kind of porta potty sort of bathrooms and not much of a visitor center and tons and tons of visitors. I think 1.5 million a year, and a parking lot. Change here. In a parking lot that is.
You want to go to the next slide?
Oh yeah.
And then you can also use the arrows.
Yeah, I think I accidentally set up some. So a parking lot, which is literally right there, interfering with the scenic wonder that you're coming to view. So it's a place that needs some help, and so here's Jóngeir, and then Þórir Arnarsson is out there at the University of Iceland Center at Help, and he's an expert of the glaciers. We talked to rangers who gave us their perspective. I went actually 2 trips, one in August, one just recently, where we went into an ice cave, and then also in this room, Garrison, the eco-acoustic researcher about the glaciers. We went on a trip together back there, and I'm waiting to see what Garrison comes out with by way of a composition of glacier sounds and everything, because I'm like, maybe that's worth writing about someday too. So I took a picture of him doing his field work while we're out there. So so that's one story, and that one I don't have a home for yet. I'm waiting to see what shape the story takes, but it might be something like an environmental magazine. I've written a bunch of pieces for Earth Island Journal. It could be something like Smithsonian Magazine. It could be something like a newspaper magazine, a Sunday magazine, or something like that. Okay, so then I did, for my first trip out there, Iceland's already influencing my writing. This is the one piece I've actually already published. Is I was supposed to write a piece about urban farming in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm from, and instead I spent the first 2/3 of it describing glaciers and how the soil is so bare and it takes a long time to form. And I was like, we need to be careful with the fertility of the basis of our civilization. And so I wrote a lot about the glacier, and I think people in Cambridge were like, huh, didn't put that together with the little community garden down the street. But I put it together. Okay, so then the story I knew I was following before I even showed up in Iceland was actually about salmon conservation. And Sir James Ratcliffe, a British billionaire, was building an empire about salmon conservation, fly fishing in the northeast of Iceland. I'll talk about that in a second. But as soon as I went to go talk to salmon people here, they were like, oh, that's not the story. The story is the thousands of farm salmon that are escaping into the wild messing with the genetics of the wild salmon here. It's this huge threat. And so I jumped in a car with Candace posing as my photographer. She's like, don't kiss me when I'm on duty, because it undermines my credibility with the but we went off tracking these 4 Norwegian fishery scientists, but who were present in the Icelandic media as kind of fish killers, like they were armed with spear guns, which are utterly illegal in this country, and trying to kill the farm salmon. There's one of their victims, and they're just floating up and down these cold rivers in scuba gear or dry suits with snorkels. And then we went to the fish farm, and then I attended a protest with where the bodies that had recovered these farm salmon was laid on the steps of Parliament with this pesticide, which was just yellow food coloring, luckily, because they got the children to wander around just like pouring it on everywhere. And the kids, of course, were having fun and splashing pesticide on each other and fish. It's like, luckily, not real pesticide. And it was at least 4 or 5 film crews making a documentary about this. And so it was a big deal and an ongoing story. And I unfolding my version of it into this story about 6 rivers. And that's in theory being written for the New Yorker. Their process is extremely involved. I've had multiple long talks with an editor there, and I think they're on board, but I'm got a deadline tomorrow to come up with a new version that can be run by the other editors, because there's a whole session where my editor has to be grilled by the other editors before we finally approve it. Yeah, so that's all going on. Okay, so then 6 Rivers was the original thing with James Radcliffe. A billionaire builds a salmon empire. Maybe that's a good thing. I was coming in with a lot of skepticism about billionaires building playgrounds for catches, doing trophy hunting and sport fishing. I came away pretty convinced that they're sincere about conservation. And so it took me a long time, but I got access to the place. So there's me kind of on site. There's that photo from the opening. This is on the Hafsau River. This is on the Selah River. This is a guide who sort of became my guide and handler. It was really interesting to see how he sort of took me into all these meetings, and he's been guiding people on the river for 8 years. And as he saw what questions I was asking, he started doing what he would do with I think salmon fishermen, where he was like, he could see that I was missing a lead, missing something, and he'd step in and be like, what about this question? People. But I think he was also making sure I didn't see things I wasn't supposed to see, like the building of the billionaire's private compound. So I was out there. We went way up into the sources of the river, where they're trying to place salmon, hoping that they'll come back every year and sort of expand their habitat. This terrain is one where they're planning to plant and reforest up to 1 million trees a year, so they're trying to ramp up to get more biotic material into the rivers so that it'll support a greater salmon population in the rivers. This is actually fairly risky work. The billionaire started a whole car company to build an off-road vehicle tough enough to handle the kinds of stuff he loves to do. He's also doing conservation in Africa and sort of big game parks. Not for hunting, but for conservation. So, and this car is called Grenadier, the Ineos Grenadier, actually had to be deployed to rescue a stuck Land Rover Defender that was way up in the headlands and the headwaters of the river. And so I captured that exciting scene. So this is what I'm working on right now. I was writing about this, and then along the way, I became curious. In some ways, because of the farm salmon and this idea of domestication, which is something that's happened to salmon just in the time we've been alive. It's become a domesticated species. It took goats and horses and dogs and cats and all these other species tens of thousands of years to become fully domesticated. We've done it to salmon within a generation. And I was curious about this idea of when we set out to protect biodiversity, or does it include the biodiversity we've created essentially by selective breeding? And actually, where's Pia?
Mia.
Oh, Mia.
Oh, she probably went to the other room.
Yeah, right. So what happens, with the breed of dog? Right? We get attached. It's our creation and all that. So this is just a general question I had. And so I heard about this one woman who is from the Fulbright, and this theme of the Fulbright being incredibly helpful is going to come up even more for us. But yeah, who basically single-handedly saved the goat as a big enough population so that it doesn't become too inbred and too rare to really sustain itself. And so I went out to the farm, which is called Hafel, and I got to hold a goat and take pictures and some writing profile of this. I haven't again, I haven't really found a home for this. I haven't been looking, partly because there's one place in the US in Maine that also breeds Icelandic goats. There's this old couple that breed rare things from around the world and they've taken on the Icelandic goat. And I think if I talk to them once I get back and it turns out to be a good story there, then I can maybe make it a magazine story for the Boston Globe because it'll have a really good tie-in. Otherwise, I'll write something for some other more general magazine. Okay, and then this is where I explicitly mentioned that the Fulbright is an amazing organization to be connected to, and Belinda had this idea of taking us to the ocean cluster here in Reykjavik, which it turns out it was just one of those monthly activities which you should never miss, and I'm going to miss them on Friday, sadly. But I didn't know what to expect with the ocean cluster. I'm like, okay, a bunch of companies with something to do with the ocean that are clustered. But yeah, I trusted that there'll be something there that's worth visiting. And as it turns out, it's not only fascinating in itself to see this goal of basically 100% usage of fish. It connected with my theme of conservation, because essentially, if you picture just two sides of a war that's been going on for a century at least, in most places in the world, where fishermen need and fishing industries need to catch enough fish to stay in business and to keep their communities in business and their families. And then the fish are, between climate change and overfishing and pollution and vanishing and conservation, so like limit the catch so the fisheries doesn't collapse or the fisheries just collapse. You picture this binary. The new thing that the ocean cluster is dedicated to is the idea that if you just use more of the fish and build a higher value chain from the fish, you can support the industry with fewer fish. And that reduces fishing pressure, which is really the theme actually of Six Rivers as well. So there's reducing fishing pressure on salmon. So I've actually been back to talk to Thor Sigvason, who founded this. He not only does this in Iceland, he is on the board and has built partnerships with one in Portland, Maine, that's a little more focused on lobster there, as you can imagine. And then there's also one in Massachusetts, where I'm from, in New Bedford, that's looking at wind power, offshore wind energy and related industries and fishing, including trying to build artificial reefs around offshore wind installations. And then there's one off the Long Island side of Connecticut. So there's 3 New England tie-ins to this. And so this is a very natural for the Boston Globe. So I've pitched the idea of a cover story for their magazine about ocean clusters with this thing. And that was just because I was like, oh, Belinda's leading the story, the ocean cluster. I hadn't thought about any of this before. Okay, and then I think that brings us to the thank yous. Really a huge thank you to Candace, my partner, who, I can't go too much into detail. This is not as high security as cybersecurity, but she faced down the Harvard Business School administration in order to get the time off to join me here. This has just made the place magical. I wouldn't be a complete story if I didn't embarrass her about it. And she's a crack for time. Then, of course, the Fulbright Iceland, Belinda and Pietro, thank you so much. This has been just a life-defining experience. And I think not something we're easily going to let go of. So maybe I will be here in the fall teaching another round. Then from the University Environmental Natural Resources Program, I won't read every name. Hopefully you can see these and just thank you. People have just been so inclusive and gone out of their way to make this all possible. And I've got all kinds of friends. I guess I go into detail, but just people who made all our lives here as full and rich as possible for a life to be anywhere. And I'm just so grateful. And actually, a name I was going to put on here, but was Augusta, who's here, a student, colleague in conservation, and has taken us, Candace and I, to incredible hiking spots all around Reykjavik, which has been a big part of the experience as well. So I just wanted to thank everyone.
Thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful presentation, just like the one before. Let's just start by opening up to questions. First let me say, I am so glad because when we had that first lunch when you arrived, I told you about the goats.
Yes.
And because I love, I always just love a person who's really passionate about what they do. And at Halifax, I've brought many groups there, and I take visitors there all the time. And she's so inspiring. So I'm so glad to hear that you're doing something with her, and of course with Ocean Clusters as well. That's fabulous. Open up to questions. Well, if nobody is, okay, yeah.
Start us off.
Yeah.
So I just recently realized that there's a difference between conservation and preservation. And I wonder from a writing perspective, is writing about conservation, would that be any different than writing about preservation due to like the different, philosophies and ideals behind both of those different movements?
Yeah, this is something where actually it was a fairly big focus in that class I sat in on protected areas that took us out to Vatnajökull that Jóngeir had led. If usually when you think about conservation, there's different degrees of protection that you might want, and at the highest level of protection is preservation, where you just say of an area, let's not build any infrastructure, let's limit people, maybe keep them out of it altogether. Like there's an island here, Surtsey, that emerged from the sea in the 60s, and the highest level of protection, they don't want humans directly on it, except once a year for a scientific expedition, because they want to see the natural processes uninterfered with as an island vegetates and populates through those natural processes. There's a small area of Vatnajökull that's that kind of area in the national park that's that level of just preservation. Stay away from it. Conservation broadly has much different kinds of categories, including, for example, sustainable use. There's the Snæfellsnes nest, and I'm sorry, I've been here so long and I know my pronunciation is so American. But Snæfellsnes Peninsula is applied to be part of what's called the Man in the Biosphere program, where the whole idea is there are protected parts of the landscape, but overall it's one that's inhabited, but people are inhabiting it in a way that's conscious of and protective of the natural systems. But the whole area might be called protected, even though it also includes people living in it. So there's a different range, and I'm broadly interested in the whole range. And I think maybe just personally, when I'm looking for hopeful stories, I think the battle to preserve the illusion that we can keep things as they are, and humans can take over 96% of all vertebrate biomass on the planet, for example, and leave the other 4% and it'll be fine. I think that's false, right? Whatever we don't directly trample and build roads into, deforest and whatever, is going to be so severely affected by climate change and ocean acidification that the whole idea that we can just set something aside is probably a lost cause ultimately, although very valuable for as long as it can last. So yeah, so I think actually I spoke with the head of the World Reindeer Herders Association, who was here at the Arctic Circle, which I should have put some pictures of that because that was an amazing source of story ideas too. But and he was saying, look, humans could not live in the places where we live as reindeer herders without the reindeer. And the reindeer would not be anywhere near as numerous and represented there without the humans. This is a bi-species system that makes inhabitants possible in the very far north. And so that kind of system where humans and natural systems can work together in a sustainable way over generations. Like that's, and what helps us build toward that, essentially, I think that's the more hopeful end.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so is that kind of like the foundation for where you find hope in conservation? Is like, look, it's not preservation, it can't be preservation, but there's still some room for hope in conservation, and then you can explore kind of what that looks like.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so one example I was writing about in Thailand, it was a whole article about the forest monks, these Buddhist monks who preserve the natural areas around the monasteries. And one of the ways they do it is that they ordain trees, they do initiation ceremonies and consecration ceremonies and put a robe around the base of a particularly significant tree. And in a sense, that's preserving it, right? Hopefully, right? That then it's symbolically like this matters, you can't just chop it down. But what they're using for strategically is to keep forests intact enough near watersheds that it doesn't then cause the whole landscape to dissolve into mudslides and dry up. And farmers in the area's sustenance also vanish, which then causes them to need to cut down trees and do all kinds of stuff to live. So there's a way in which they're preserving an interacting kind of landscape by preserving a tiny key piece of it.
Can I ask you, what surprised you most about Iceland, and especially maybe from a conservation perspective? What was there something here that really was different than you thought it was going to be?
Man, there's so many levels in which I could try to address that question. I thought it would feel cold. And occasionally it does when the wind is up to 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But the fact that we're here, it's months go by, the temperature never goes above 40 or 50, and it's like you just get used to it. And these sweaters, these aesthetic sweaters are a big part of the thing. The heated outdoor pools that are going to be around. Like it's like there's just not a sense of being cold.
No,
And
of course, Boston is cold.
Boston gets cold. Yeah, Boston gets much cold. But also, so more seriously, I think what I didn't realize, because you don't know from a distance how much is marketing and tourism,
exactly.
What's real.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized how deeply the identification of Icelanders with nature goes. Like, I think it's not just something that's like, hey, visit these natural wonders for tourists. The sense of emotional investment in nature that I keep running into just with people. When I mentioned to one of the creative writing professors, I'll leave my name, that I was writing about Radcliffe, for example, he was like, I hate him. And I was like, wait, what? Where is this coming from? But the sense of like, it's Icelandic nature and British people shouldn't be buying it. And that's a little bit nationalism, but it's I think fundamentally there's this real protectiveness that goes deep in visual identification, and I didn't quite realize that would be the case. And it's been,
That's interesting.
So even with the goats, there's just such a strong protectiveness toward the legacies that it's really wonderful actually to see and to interact with. And I wish we had a form of environmental education in the US that could get across the population these kinds of values.
Interesting. All right, one final question.
More of a comment than a question. Like, I mean, we usually evaluate by our impact, like where we publish, what we publish. So I love the fact that you're writing like stories accessible to general audiences, and like and looking at where to place them to find audiences that really like appreciate those stories, and that they have probably way higher impact, especially in terms of conversation, than by publishing these things in some academic journal where it's read by like a handful of people, but like we get a check mark for impact. So I think that is really important, specifically in this discipline, to publish this widely for broad audience. So I think that's extremely useful and valuable to do that work.
Thank you. I will say, I published this article in the Boston Globe that was for this urban wetland in Boston area. And I was like, oh, this is going to change everything because people will see how polluted it is and how we really need to act. And the truth is, it was briefly like, everyone was like, interesting. And then the group that really made a difference was the one that it was a local citizens activist group that made inroads with the local legislators. And then they use my article a little bit, but it's really to make change. And we all know this, right? We read news and we're like, oh, what a shame, or what's going on there? We get activated about it, but we don't actually do anything. So in a way, to get the change happening, you need the people who are just absolutely committed. And so to the extent that these can inspire that, I will say timing is important. So Lisa Murkowski, the US Senator who was at the Arctic Circle, she loves the ideas of ocean clusters. In fact, so much that apparently she's saying she was inspired by walking through the ocean cluster in 2011, even though it wasn't built until 2012. Right? So she was but she loves it, and she's introduced national legislation to support ocean clusters across the US that would, this important conservation potential payoff. And so if my article can support that effort, so put it into the big public conversation, so it goes from being one of those ideas which senators and congressmen are full of, like, we file a bill, and then it goes nowhere because it's not a priority. If the public conversation can help it become a priority, then timing-wise, it might be really useful.
Yes, and I wanted to mention also that all of these wonderful articles and pieces that you've been talking about, you have to let us know when they're published. You have to send them to us. You have to make sure that the commission, so that we can brag about it.
Okay.
Yes, yes. So thank you so much. So, I mean, we've heard two very different presentations today, but again, that's what it's so lovely about Fulbright, right? We get these, I mean, both of these projects so impactful, so important to Iceland. And, we are very grateful that you uprooted yourselves, came over here and took part in the Fulbright program with us. We thank you, for all the work you've done. We thank you for your friendship. And now, of course, we look forward to having you as members of the Fulbright alumni community. And so you will be on our mailing list. You will be hearing from us regularly. And whenever you come back to Iceland, of course, we expect to hear from you. We expect you to stop by, let us know what you're doing. And more than that, just in general, whatever you're, when you're doing something interesting, that, let us know, because we like to follow our alumni and what they're doing and all of their triumphs and victories. But for now, I have for you both a little Fulbright Iceland swag. So you can come here and get your Fulbright Iceland water bottles and your Fulbright Iceland pins. Again, thank you. And thank you to everybody who came today and listened and are working, and thank you guys for working with us to make the world a little bit of a better place, to help the relations between Iceland and US, which are strong and fabulous, but can always be stronger and more fabulous. So thanks again to everybody. Also those who joined us online, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you next time. I just want to do one small plug before we end. We've just opened for applications for Fulbright Arctic Initiative 4, a fabulous program for scholars, an 18-month program that involves all of the countries of the Arctic Council states and is across disciplines, right? So we're looking for natural sciences, social sciences, people in the arts and humanities as well, because we want to look at the Arctic from that wide perspective. We can't be doing Arctic research in a bubble anymore. Everybody has to be thinking about the big picture. So that is a fabulous program. We've just opened for applications. On the Icelandic side, we're looking to recruit a couple of fabulous scholars. And we're also very willing and excited to host some Americans who join the program on the American side and would have Iceland as their exchange country. So spread the word, please. And if anybody here themselves would be interested in applying, you can always also talk to Pétur here at the commission for more information, but you'll find a lot of information on our website as well. So thank you, everybody. And that's all for now.